Welcome to another episode of Leaders Talk. My guest today is Professor Christian Andres, Dean of WHU Business School.
As a business school, we have outreach through the 2,000 students that we have on campus, the thousands of alumni that we have. We are able to educate responsible leaders in the future who can help shape this environment towards a more sustainable environment. And that's kind of the, if you want to call it lighthouse, this what sustainability or doing business sustainably means in all its facets, breaking this down and integrating it into the curricula of our programs.
Leaders Talk, the interview podcast portraying leaders who are committed to better leadership, better organizations, and a better world. Hosted by Managing Partner of Leadership Choices and co-founder of the Cosmic Foundation, Carsten Drath.
Christian is now the Dean of WHU for 1 year, and we are looking back on the highlights, the lowlights of this first year, major initiatives, major changes, programs that they have launched, the vision, the strategy, the culture, all of the things that he and his core leadership team want to change at WHU, and also that the role that WHU is playing in today's society and in today's market and even geopolitical environment. All of that is something we're discussing, and also what created an imprint in Christian's life. What were values or role models that he received early in his life, that he got, and how did he finally end up becoming a professor for economics and then the dean of Germany's #1 business school. All of that in our talk now. So let's go right into the talk with Christian Andres. A very warm welcome to Professor Christian Andres. Welcome to Leaders Talk.
Hello, Carsten. Pleasure to be here.
Christian, what do you do? Who are you? What do you do? The entering questions.
Well, I am a researcher, teacher, geek. That's the person, I guess. And in my role, I'm Dean of WHU, the Otto Beisheim School of Management, a private business school based in Fallendar near Koblenz and Düsseldorf.
And what are you a geek for?
Well, I do corporate finance, and so I'm an academic, obviously, and academics we are under no illusion. That's why I say a geek. That things that we write in our journals, in our academic journals, are read only by a handful, maybe hundreds at best, of other people, and these are also people deep into the profession. And so corporate finance, that would be. But I'm also interested in kind of the geeky stuff around technology that I mean, naturally, if you're a researcher and I'm an empiricist, which means I crunch data, you're in part always a bit of a programmer. And I would say programmers naturally have a bit of a geeky nature to them.
Okay. And Christian, you are the Dean of WHU, and you are doing this now for 1 year. Tell us, how did you come into the role? I mean, you probably weren't born with one day I will become dean of a private business school, #1 in Germany, that kind of thing. So what were some steps that led you there?
Okay, maybe not to start at the very beginning. Let's start with my time at WHU, because I joined WHU. Well, academics are oftentimes nomads, which means we move from A to B to C. I did my PhD in Bonn, then went to Mannheim, Mainz, and then to WHU, and that was in early 2011. So, in other words, there's got to be a reason why I've stayed at WHU for 13 years by now, and hopefully many years to come. And well, I started at WHU as a professor of corporate finance in 2011, and at this point, I left the kind of lifelong civil servant contract that I had in Mainz, because I was looking for something else. Again, public universities. I'm kind of a child. I've been academically socialized within the German public university landscape, but I always thought that there's many positive things about, and I basically owe a lot to my entire education, again, to the public system in Germany, but many things don't work as fast as I would want them to work. They're less agile, a buzzword that we often use these days. They're less entrepreneurial in the sense that if you want to do something, you get it done somehow. There's some support system around you, which means there's a broader understanding, because oftentimes in public universities, you have your kingdom at a chair, and there's less of a common dynamic. And this is what I was hoping for at WHU. And I remember at the time, again, being an empiricist, I need access to, and if you're a finance empiricist, you need essentially access to the big databases, and they're costly. And the WHU at the time didn't have these databases. And another colleague of mine who also is in empirical corporate finance had at the time recently joined the school and also mentioned the name of the database to the dean. And the dean asked me, if you join WHU, what is it that you need from our side? And I basically said, again, empiricist, I need this and that data. He said, well, I've heard that before and I've checked, it's quite costly. But look, you're now the third person to tell me about that. We'll get it done within a year, this is a 6-digit number. At public universities, this takes ages, right? And in a year's time, we had this database access. And this was just a small anecdote, in a sense, that basically was very impressive for me at the time, that at this school, people together want to get something done and succeed in that. In 2015, I then became associate dean for research, then again in last year, 2023, dean of the school. So I've been in different leadership roles. I've been academic director of several of our degree programs, associate dean for research. And then naturally, I think if you have experience in several leadership roles, you enjoy the school a lot, you enjoy the environment, the very vibrant community that we have here. It's kind of a natural step or a natural role to assume.
How do you look back at the last year of being dean? What were milestones, highlights, lowlights? How do you look back?
With mixed feelings. On a bottom line, on a very positive note, but there's buts, obviously. Why? Because you mentioned in the beginning, we're a private business school, which means we, of course, charge tuition fees, but we're in an environment that is also characterized by strong public schools, which means you cannot price, for example, a bachelor program, which is always a very local program, at cost. Right, which means, and we're also a very, you mentioned we're the #1 business school. Also, we're a very research-intense business school, which means we have a social goal. We want to attract the best talent, develop it further from the bachelor to the master, MBA, and so on and so on. And we're research-intense. We aspire to be thought leaders. So we, by design, have a structural deficit, because research at a business school, we don't create patents and so on. That's not possible to monetize. And therefore, we, of course, have the strong support that we're very happy about and grateful for of the Beisheim Foundation, our patronage, the Otto Beisheim School of Management. But of course, we also get donations from business, from other third parties, individuals, and so on. And we're currently in a very difficult macroeconomic environment, right? So we are in a technical recession in Germany. Some of our sponsors, so companies that have sponsored entire chairs, are cutting back on spending. We feel that, absolutely. Internationally, wars. We have a war in Europe, which is also, if you want to attract a Chinese Indian student to Germany, that also struck me because at the time when the Ukraine war broke out, I was still academic director of a master in management program, and in a talk to a student, they asked me, what am I going to tell my parents about the war? And I was a bit kind of caught off guard, because I thought they were talking about refugees from Ukraine coming to Germany. And I answered, well, everything is, we're used to that, not in the sense of, but we know how to handle that, right? We've had a Syrian refugee crisis. Of course, there's some people from Ukraine coming, looking for shelter. But you won't feel much of that if you study in rural Falanda. And he said, well, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a war 700 kilometers from the German border. What are you going to do if talking about Russia, come to Germany next? And this kind of really, at the time, caught me off guard because I hadn't conceived that that was even an option. And this basically shows we, as a European business school, as Germans here, are seen as a party that is close to a war, which is not very helpful if you want to attract talent from, let's say, Asia, whose opportunity would be to go to, other opportunity would be to go to the US, for example, right? So Europe is not very tempting, not a lot of growth in Europe, difficult environment. That's the negative aspect, right? And we feel it. On a positive note, you mentioned exactly this now been year one as dean of the school. And we've changed also a little bit not a little bit, we've changed the core leadership team of the school from the old dean and associate deans to a new structure that is more team-based, I would say. And this means you need a team you can rely on. And beyond this so-called core leadership team, as we called it, whenever you have amendments to a strategy of a school, you need support from the broader community. And these are kind of the highlights. People who earlier indicated, well, if you're willing to assume this responsibility, we're here to help. Who ultimately put their, well, not their money where, but their effort where their mouth is, and indeed do help. So that's definitely the highlights of seeing if you're in such a vibrant community, and you want to leverage a team effort, it's possible. Absolutely, there's strong support from many people.
Okay, what were some, let's say, lighthouse projects or initiatives that you started in this 1 year, in this first year?
Well, Lighthouse, we had an outgoing dean for 8 years, right? And therefore, again, when a new person comes in, there's some changes to be made that are not necessarily big lighthouse, but we needed, for example, the MBA program curriculum became somewhat, because we started the full-time MBA a little bit more than a decade ago, but we hadn't made any. And of course, there's additional electives being added as time progresses with digitalization and so on, right? New trends coming up, but we needed a fundamental rethinking, essentially, of our MBA program, because basically, there's, in addition to digitalization, the big challenges that have a societal nature. What I mean by that is we need to move, whether you call it the circular economy, or we need to change the way we do business. And a business school is at the very core, because we see how we lived industrialization for the past 200 years. It's coming to an end, right? Because we consume more resources, or we emit more carbon that we extract from the ground and pollute the environment. That's not gonna go on. So we as business schools, and this is again one of to get back to your earlier question, what is quite tempting about this role, and also as a whole, as a business school, we have outreach through the 2,000 students that we have on campus, the thousands of alumni that we have. We are able to educate responsible leaders in the future who can help shape this environment towards a more sustainable environment. And that's kind of if you want to call it lighthouse, this what sustainability or doing business sustainably means in all its facets, breaking this down and integrating it into the curricula of our programs, most notably with the MBA, but we're also in the executive MBA and other programs in the process of doing just that, because we decided early last year against, for example, a master in sustainability. Some business schools do that. We do not believe that this is the right course of action, because I always use the analogy of digitalization. You wouldn't do a master in digitalization, because you need to be able to say, what does digitalization mean for finance? What does it mean for supply chains, and so on and so on. And the same holds true for sustainability. So we need a holistic approach. And therefore, integrated with the curricula, we started a sustainability management center to late last year, which bundles basically our efforts. Also, is the direct touch point, the liaison towards our alumni network and corporate partner network that we do have. And beyond that, a couple of these are restructurings, let's say. We have a marketing project that we started at the school because marketing had grown into a very bits and pieces spread in different departments because 6, 7, 8 years ago, digital marketing became a thing. So we had a digital marketing unit. We had an offline marketing unit. We do program marketing in the programs. So it's scattered across the organization, which causes frictions. So we have then restructured this and are now in the process of, not ready to publicly or not even within the school finally, but of course people know we're working on that, but we need a centralized marketing unit which strengthens our marketing efforts. And then, I already indicated that earlier, that my leadership style is a team-based, and also given the nature, the growth of the school by now, we need to have decentralized decision-making. And therefore, we started a kind of more cultural project that we call Leading Together, where the goal is firstly to establish a culture where people speak up, raise concerns. We don't have a kind of name and blame kind of culture at the school, because you could argue, why don't you change processes, right? If I talk about decentral decision-making, I need to make sure that the information is available for informed decision-making at the decentralized unit. But that's not really helpful. You can give people the information, but if they don't feel they're empowered also culturally to take decisions decentrally, you've heard this saying, we all have heard it many times, but culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? So you first need to have the culture, and then we need to have the process, of course, in place to have a more collaborative, more decentralized decision-making at the institution, because simply we've outgrown centralized hierarchical decision-making structures at the school.
Okay, that was very rich. So let's maybe deconstruct what you all said. So I think the first complex was around what's the purpose of a school like WHU? I found that quite compelling because, I am alum since 2002. So like that, unfortunately says how old I am. But my reputation, or when I thought of WHU, I thought of McKinsey, Boston Consulting, investment banking, Zamba Brothers, startup, business, but e-commerce, scale fast, break things kind of thing, making it a big hype of this Berlin, ecosystem. That were the things that I associated with WHU. But what you're painting now is a quite different picture.
Yes and no, absolutely. Because I would say that many of the, and by the way, feel free to interrupt me. As a faculty, as professors, we love to talk, right? If I go out on a long journey, feel free to jump in. This kind of skills, analytical thinking, strategic thinking, that's what you need at McKinsey. That's what you need at BCG and so on, right? So I wouldn't say that this stands at odds with what the school has been standing for, but you're right to some extent, obviously, because the big business models, the success stories of the past at the school, we're very proud of our alums beyond these 15 unicorns, but there's 15 unicorns that the school's alums have founded in the past. And they have in common, more or less, that they're all based on these kind of scalable, let's build a business model in the internet. You mentioned the Zamba Brothers, but there's more, right? Zalando, for example, also a WHU startup. But even the Flixes of this world, they build a platform and so on. And you don't need any kind of deep tech kind of expertise to build these kind of platforms. They're based on classic business administration kind of education. And I'm not saying that we will downscale our education in terms of analytical thinking, strategic thinking. Again, what has been important, I would say, at BCG, McKinsey 10 years ago is in terms of these basic skills still valid today and will be in the future. The big but comes the kind of business models that worked well in the 20s and 2010s. So what I'm saying is we have smart students who identify business opportunities, but this environment changes. So this in part because the environment has changed. And what I mean as an economist, the interest rate environment has changed. And what in the 2010s, platform-based business models, it was, let's build a platform and let's worry about monetization later, right? And investors were willing to finance these because money was super cheap. You don't, as a finance guy, you don't discount future expected cash flows much. So it doesn't matter whether you monetize in 10, 15 years or in 5 years, or it doesn't matter much, right? This has changed for once, for good, I would say, because no one expects super low interest rates anytime soon. But even more importantly, I would say what has changed is the general understanding that get back and maybe a little bit more detail what I mentioned earlier. The business model that we in the West, I'm talking about industrialization from England to Europe to the US of the past 200 years, the way we have built societal business models has come to a natural end because we consume more resources than is refilled or we can replenish somehow. So we need to change the way of doing business. And there's one option, which is, we've reached a certain development phase and now let's stop with growth and, degrowth fantasies in a sense, right? That's what also many voice. I don't believe that's possible because we're saying, and many times you hear these suggestions from people who are in the West, surprised, right? We've reached a high standard of living, so we can afford to scale it down a little bit. So my point is a future needs to be based on growth, because who are we in the West to tell someone in Africa, in South America, in Asia, now we should all scale back in our growth dreams? Because what growth means at the end of the day, right, is higher standard of living, better access to healthcare. Right? That's what growth at the end of the day means. And we need to now find an environment and set the right market mechanisms and also guardrails in terms of laws and so on, rules of the game in a sense, that allow us to do business more sustainably. And if we are a business school at the core of doing business, business models need to change. And we have you mentioned all of these startups. We're a very entrepreneurial school. And again, we're very proud of all our alums who've built these kind of platform-based, internet-based business models. But this is not going to be the business model of the future. So business models of the future need to take, these externalities or need to focus a lot more on sustainability, whatever that means, right? In a very broad context. But you need to build businesses that are there to last. And that's clearly also what investors demand these days. That's at least also what society demands, right? We have also beyond the aspects I mentioned before, like carbon emissions that we've become much more aware of, interest rates now being lower. The world has moved towards more transparency. Social media has, in part, there's many negative things about social media, but what it has also led to is more transparency. So people are much more aware of, things such as child labor or labor practices that we generally do not want to see as humans. In the sense of other humans work like that, right? And therefore, this has many implications that what sustainability means, I mean. And business models need to come up with, smart ideas. And that's, again, at the core of what we do. We have people who are passionate and who are very bright, and we bring them together at this business school. Now our challenge is to, firstly, sensitize them to this aspect of sustainability, and secondly, to bring them also together with people from other industries. Because if I talk, for example, now about a decarbonization kind of business model, you need some more tech expertise, engineering expertise, maybe if it's around AI, deep tech expertise. That's not what we're good at the very core, but we do have also faculty at the intersection to, for example, computer science or psychology when we talk about labor practices and so on. And therefore, we as a school need to adjust curricula, work with partners. We're in talks with several partners concerning that, but that's too soon to share. When it comes to technology, for example, but basically, again, our students are at the end of the day the ambassadors of the school. And yes, this has changed what a WHU alum wants to aspire, but that's because our environment has changed. And what young people today, the kind of classic, why was Wall Street in Gordon Gekko, a famous movie in the 1970s, 1980s and 90s? Because people aspired to be investment bankers. That's not what the 18, 19-year-olds, yes, there's still some, and you still get the tools that you need at this school to do that in terms of analytical thinking. You can do the math that is necessary to do that. You understand how markets work. But people today ask about, and students ask about more. They ask about, we're having all these purpose debates, right? And we need to have answers to that as a business school, I believe, to be successful.
Maybe to summarize, what I hear you say is, what will remain is the quest for excellence in research, the analytical skills, the focus on entrepreneurship, the focus on capitalism, but with an addition to do this in a sustainable way that uses the resources that are available to us in a smart way, helps introduce circular economy ideas, and also goes in the area of deep tech, because in order to do massive changes that involves deep tech, right? Like carbon capture or different sort of supply chains or whatever. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And here again, we as a business school, we don't aspire to become a university, have it at the faculty in terms of engineering faculty and so on. No, we are at the core a business school. So, but this means firstly partners, but secondly, many of the things that you mentioned, the question is, how do we get there towards this, let's say, circular economy? We need to develop an environment. What I mean, again, here is rules of the game. And I believe markets do work. Markets fulfill important allocation functions, but markets sometimes fail. So, and as economists, so also in terms of, we not only educate engineers, entrepreneurs, both E words, not only entrepreneurs, but also people who work, for example, in administration, who get to design. So Verena Huberts, for example, is today in German parliament, right? So it's important if you also educate, at the end of the day, people who play important roles in society, be it as entrepreneurs, as CEOs of companies, as politicians in this example, for example. It's important to understand how markets work, why markets fail, what incentives are at play, and how we can mitigate some factors that led to market failure, or redesign them so that incentives are aligned, so that people work in the desired, or move into the desired direction. And these are all fundamentally economics at the intersection to law, maybe even where we again need a partner because we're not a law school. So this more holistic view, that's what we also need, work more with external partnerships.
That sounds like a fascinating development, and it sounds like spot on the right direction to me. The other thing that you mentioned had to do with culture and with leading or leadership at WHU. Maybe what would be situations that would describe the culture that you would like to change, or what are artifacts of, this is a story that represents the kind of old culture? What comes to mind?
Good question. I mean, a culture is never imposed by someone, right? It's something that evolves organically. And again, this is a great place to work with great people at the school. But sometimes I feel that they need to be empowered more, in the sense that to directly answer your question, we oftentimes have this, yes, we're an excellent school, we strive for excellence, but sometimes things simply don't work out. That's normal, right? That's also part of being entrepreneurial. You try several things out, they simply don't work, and you need to be able then to learn from your failure. Why didn't it work? What's still good about it? And what other ingredients do I need to try it again? But you need to have then also the optimism and the learning and look ahead to try something new. This is very abstract. In concrete terms, we oftentimes have, and that's also a side effect, I guess, of excellence, when people always want to be high achievers. But we sometimes have a culture when things don't work out, a kind of blame game starts, right? So why didn't this work out? Well, it's not my fault because this and that. So that's what we sometimes have, what I would like to hear less of, right? And something like, yes, you have done your research, otherwise you wouldn't raise your voice, and you have made a certain point, that's your opinion, but then someone else raises other points. You don't have to stick with your opinion. Your opinion can change if and yes, again, you make mistakes. It's natural to overlook something, an important piece of information that you didn't consider properly, maybe in your research. Someone else brings it to your attention. You can change your opinion, right? So I was wrong. I've changed my opinion. You're right, right? So these kind of stories, because we oftentimes have this, and that's what you have if you have alpha people come together, high performers. Firstly, they don't want to fail. And if they fail, it's a bit of a blame game. Who is to blame? And this, well, in a positive sense, learning from it and also learning from each other, which is not to say that we didn't do that, absolutely. But this second aspect that I mentioned before, both are aspects that we need to work on.
And you mentioned that you have a team-based, participative leadership approach, and you notice that if you apply that in an unchanged culture, it kind of doesn't really get traction, right? How did you sense that?
Yeah, just also as an anecdote, but keeping it in the abstract, because I didn't ask the person earlier whether I can share it. But there was an example where a high-level decision needs to be taken, and of course, this has been prepared with the help of colleagues. And at the end of the day, we settled on two different options. And frankly, I still believe today, I was indifferent between the two options because they were both good choices. And I basically circled this back to the person in charge of preparing the decision and said, well, you can decide. And we, leading up to this decision, exchanged emails several times over a couple of days. And then she felt silent. And 2 days later, I basically asked, well, what did we report now back in terms of our decision? And she basically, again, summarized the pros and cons of the two options, which was a clear sign to me. Yes, all the information was on the table. I felt I wanted now to empower her because she's much closer to the actual, implications of this decision. She would have maybe something like an informed gut feeling because, again, the facts were summarized. So the gut feeling comes in. But apparently, I mean, then again, I didn't finally reach out and ask why she didn't, because I also thought that was a bit of an uncomfortable situation for her. But it was a clear sign for me that she was concerned if it's ultimately the wrong decision, someone might get back and say, well, who decided that? And yes, that would have been her then, but of course, backed by me, but didn't feel comfortable taking this decision. That's something we need to change.
Okay. And you launched an initiative that's called Leading Together at WHU, which is kind of unique in the history of the school, if I'm informed correctly. So can you describe us what that is?
Well, in the history of the school, I would say yes. In organizations, absolutely not, right? Because that's what many organizations, we've grown as a school quite significantly over the past decade. So again, not to make this a history class of WHU, but we have our 40th anniversary this year. So the school started in 1984 with 40 students. 40 students, a single intake. We now have an annual only in the bachelor program, which is one of our largest, but only one program, 250. Just in terms of scale, we have 2,000 students roughly enrolled at the school. In comparison to 40, the organization has grown significantly. So, and if you now have 400 plus employees at the school, relative to maybe a handful, you can't have centralized, bringing everybody to the table, kind of decision-making structures. And also we have two campus locations. One is in Düsseldorf, the other one is here in Fallenda, where my office is based. And if an organization has reached a certain size and you basically extrapolate this hierarchical structure that you started with, you keep adding layers on top of it. And at some point, if something within this kind of chain of command or decision-making structure, and we're still talking about a super small organization here, right? 400 plus employees. We have companies with tens of thousands of employees. I wonder what kind of struggles they will be facing if they have these hierarchical structures. But the problem is, if something in this link breaks, you can't take decisions anymore. In particular, if, for example, you have the most egregious kind of case would be the leadership can't at the very top of the school, then you're totally paralyzed. You can't take any decision anymore, right, as a school. And you can never, I think organizations shouldn't reach that point. They should be able to take decisions, even if someone within the organization is unavailable or for whatever reason can't take a decision. Plus, I mentioned this informed gut feeling, assuming that you have the right people, of course, in place who don't have pursue their individual agenda. But if everybody is united, and this is where this leading together, a sense of unity also, that what it is in terms of vision, where we want to be headed as a school, that we have a joint belief in, people decentrally have facts, and they have on top of that, so this is what I call the informed gut feeling, something on top of that, right? Because oftentimes decisions are not clear black and white decisions on a very rationalized basis, but this is kind of what this mosaic principle, as I call it. You put together different pieces of information that you find hard to grasp. And once you've reached a certain size, not all of this information can, first, in terms of size, and secondly, we now have so many programs. We have 2 bachelor programs, we have 5 Master of Science programs, we have 4 MBA programs, right? Executive MBA, full-time, part-time, online MBA program. That would be information overload for a single person. You can't even have this. So that's the underlying rationale why we started that, and why it's in the history of the school has grown significantly, and it has reached a point at which the old decision-making structure has reached a limit, and we need new ones.
Here is a note on our own behalf. We are working together with WHU in different ways. We are having one common leadership program that we jointly develop and jointly offer. It's called The Essence of Coaching for Senior Leaders. It's part of the executive education curriculum of WHU. So if you're interested in rounding your leadership style with a coaching muscle and putting that into your toolbox, that course might be something for you. So check it out on the executive education website. We'll put that in our show notes. And now back to the talk with Christian Andres. In this cultural journey, there were 2 key terms that seem to be of certain importance there. One is psychological safety, and then there was Augenhöhe. What does that mean?
Well, and some of our international colleagues raised the point that Augenhöhe warrants a bit of an explanation, because obviously it's a German, and I still haven't found a good term in English, because it has several, and that's a fair question therefore that you ask. On eye level is maybe wrong. I'm not sure, but basically that first, I think the most important that we didn't talk about much is that you have encounters with respect. You approach other people with respect. Yes, of course, naturally, again, if you are an organization in which you have professors, that's an analogy that we often here use is in hospitals. You have doctors who are the ones who do the surgery in a narrow sense. We have the professors who do the research in a narrow sense, right? And therefore, naturally, within also these organizational units have leadership roles, and they are the leaders in their chairs or in institutes and so on. But for them also, it's important to have access to information that people who are closer to the ground, maybe if you have a student assistant who talks to the students, right? A research assistant teaching assistant talking to students, they get a fuller picture of you, of course, just trying to depict several examples. As a professor, with time, you read a classroom, right? What the classroom dynamics are. But maybe there's aspects, bits and pieces that you don't don't get simply, right? That the person who's talking to students, the TA who's closer to them, also age-wise, might get. And they might not be willing or feel safe to raise this point, just like the nurse might not be willing to raise the point to the surgeon that they're cutting the wrong leg or something like that, right? But that's, again, luckily, we're not in this business. We don't harm people if we make mistakes as faculty, but we can have better courses, better student learning, right? If we have this information present. So a Augenhöhe means a doctoral student should feel empowered to respectfully, of course, in both directions, raise a point that maybe a professor didn't acknowledge a point raised by a student appropriately, whatever it is, right? So that at the end of the day, we have better student learning, better research. If there's things that someone overlooked, simply based on their seniority or level in an organization, I feel that oftentimes people feel they are reluctant. There's a natural reluctance to raise critical points in particular. And raising critical points, again, I also made that point in our core leadership team, because then we are, in a sense, among equals. So what I'm saying, it's not only from, let's say, professor towards TA, but also among people. I always get nervous. That's what I mentioned in one of our first meetings. If everybody is always nodding, everybody agrees to everything, and we move on. There's always, and again, of course, this does not mean that you should endlessly discuss any decision you need to make, but there's often things we overlook, and people should, even if we are generally willing, we're united to move into a certain direction, someone should feel even obliged to raise an objection. Because that's an objection, if it's, again, well-reasoned, raising a point that someone else outside will raise. Right? And that's what, in a sense, this Augenhöhe, I think, means. Encountering respectfully, raising points that someone else might have overlooked.
And you now mentioned some examples in the academic domain, but that would also apply in the admin team and the non-academic staff and across borders and within the different subgroups in the different villages, so to speak.
Absolutely. I think that's a problem that you encounter whenever you move from a hierarchical structure to more decentralized structure, because hierarchies always come with power, and power can be abused. That's what people might fear, that power is abused, right? And then they're reluctant to be the square peg in the round hole, again, this Jobs analogy, to make someone else feel uncomfortable because they don't agree with them. And that's something that stands at odds, again, with this more decentralized and at the end of the day, not for the sake of it, but we want to make better decisions at the end of the day. And better decisions are based on, they are more informed decisions. And people need to be willing to share information. So
in other terms, it's another dimension of excellence, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, that makes sense. And Christian, what's your vision 5 years from now? Where do you see WHU 5 years from now? What would be a dream, a best case scenario?
Well, with 5 years, I would say, well, dreams and visions for me go beyond the next 5 years. But within the next 5 years, the school should have grown already. We're currently not in a growth phase. That's not something for the immediate. So that's not a short-term focus, because again, difficult macroeconomic environment that we're facing here, and interest rate environment, and so on and so on. On top of that, in 5 years' time, the school should have grown. We should be standing also for sustainable leadership, that it's known by everybody. We should, in general, be better known, because, and that's a general, I would say, going beyond WHU. But again, why is this my also goal for a vision of WHU? We in Europe are not good at seeing educational, again, universities, but institutes, everybody else, we create knowledge, right? We develop something new. And in the US, you put these kind of Harvard, Yale, and so on, these brands that everybody knows, they're printed on t-shirts. And yes, we also have a WHU hoodie, but even in Europe. So I'm not saying education is not sexy. We in Europe put Harvard and so on H&M hoodies, right? So it's not that we do not like, but we don't really appreciate our European institutions. we should move into this direction, value education more within Europe. And WHU, we are the #1 business school, as mentioned before. We're at the forefront. So I'm not saying I want to see WHU on an H&M t-shirt, but WHU should definitely become significantly better known within society as a business school that is, again, we're a non-for-profit. We have a societal goal, and this is to attract the best talent. We want to be the school for excellent entrepreneurs, for people who want to get things done, who want to change things, and want to build this more sustainable future for us as societies. That's what we should be known for in 5 years' time.
Great. And Christian, maybe let's go to you as a person. So what was, when you were young, what was like influencing you? What was the environment like? And what we're looking for is kind of the golden thread that eventually led to you being dean of WHU. So what were some early decisions or early influences of your parents, of the environment, of the school, of the church? I know something about that. Can you talk us through?
Absolutely. Thanks for the question. I was born in the 1970s, grew up then. Therefore, what I can really remember in terms of if you mentioned childhood, that's for me the 1980s and 1990s. And leading to this question, I always remember. I thought about what were the 1980s like, and if you today see the facts, right? Cold War coming to an end, we had Chernobyl and so on. All of this sounds daunting, but this is not how it felt. So I grew up in a very free, liberal, peaceful environment in which I personally was allowed to, I was given the environment to, well, support for sure from my parents to flourish, freedom, basically. That's probably why I became a professor at the end of the day, right? So this option to explore things on my own, this was a very kind of, again, liberal, free kind of environment. I remember I grew up in the western Germany, in the countryside. I remember during summer vacations of telling my mom at 8 o'clock in the morning, I meet with my friends, we'll go to the woods, and she just asked me, when are you going to be back? Right? So there were no mobile phones, and a little bit pity. Well, my kids are 9 and 14 years old, and they grow up with smartphones, of course, but this was a time which you simply weren't reachable. You could do your thing and try out things without directly, also if something didn't work out, receiving, well, punishment or someone telling you not to do things, because there was less of a, well, in this case, also transparency of what you do all day, and this freedom. It was basically characterized by freedom. And also, yes, you mentioned church. My again, Catholic neighbor, parents, my mom a teacher, my father was a construction steel worker first, and then later became an engineer. But this is also, I think, something that influenced me, because he did an apprenticeship building, well, as a steel worker, bridges, then went to school again, and became an engineer. Ultimately, then moving in the opposite direction, building tunnels and roads. But you can develop things, you can progress if this is what you aspire, what you want to do. This is, I think, something that very much has links with academia and also WHU, without now going through every single step. But you also mentioned this church, this aspect of humility, modesty to some extent. My mom always told me respect means showing up on time. These kind of secondary virtues, I think we call them, right? Is also something that definitely influenced me, and that I think is important, are still today important values for working society.
And Christian, economics, when you think of freedom, is not the first thing that comes to mind. What was the rationale to pick that as a field?
A long answer or a short answer?
No, whatever you want.
Okay, the long answer, if I hadn't become a professor, I think I would have become an entrepreneur. Because also at the time, as I told you, at 7 o'clock in the morning, I went out into the woods, started building things. Together with my friends, we wanted to to start writing magazines, what you can do woodwork wise and so on, right? And sell it. It was very, I mean, kids drawing pictures, of course, not thinking about scaling and so on. How can you draw this 10 times? Copy machine in the 1980s didn't work. Quality was totally different. But this already gave me, I was always kind of a bit on, or I played football a lot as a child and also in my youth. And at the time, we thought about how can we raise money for the football club, and we started printing on a typewriter, not printing, typing tickets that we sold to our parents to attend a football match and so on. Right. So this already, I would say, this is economics at the age of 8, 9 or so. But I was interested in politics because this was a time, again, 1990s, the USSR collapsing at the end of the day, reunification of Germany. Look, that's a little bit the political environment in which I grew up. So politics, a lot of things happened in the 1990s, I would say, in Europe, but also at a world level. I was very interested in politics. And therefore, I would say politics and economics are closely, because economics are an important part of politics, of course, because again, politicians spend money. Money needs to be raised, right? So the value that is added by individuals, for organizations at the end of the day. So this link between politics and business and markets, I would say that's at the core of economics. Right, because economics has ties. So that's not business administration, but the German Volkswirtschaftslehre. Right, that's what my diploma was in. How markets fail, where markets solve allocation problems, and how we build an environment based on freedom. Again, going back to my this is how I was raised in a very free environment. I believe in markets, but we need rules for markets. That's what economics does.
Okay. And there was another moment of a magical moment of freedom when you were in Australia and in New Zealand, right? So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, during my diploma, again, I spent a year in Australia. That at the time, again, was my it sounds a bit contradictory, because my parents always gave me a lot of freedom as a kid. I really had a fantastic childhood, and I'm so grateful to my parents for providing this environment. But then when I studied economics. I grew up in the Westerwald region in northern Rhineland-Palatinate, and I studied economics in Bonn because Bonn had a great reputation for economics. Also, I always enjoyed math, and it was very math-based, so kind of natural fit, but not far from home. So I was always kind of accessible to and again, I love my parents very much to this day, but I wanted really to get away. And Australia was as far as it gets. And during my time in Australia, I also I was at Monash University in Melbourne, again, tried to explore the continent, it's of course more than just a country, as far as I can. And that's something I would, again, recommend to anybody who can do that during their studies. Spend really time abroad, broadening horizon. This is not about the academics, but about the learning for life aspect of education. But point is, I answering your question, of course, had to explore New Zealand, which was at the time already, this was before The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbits, but was already at the time a dream for me. And my challenge, because I was traveling very much on a budget, I aspired to explore the entirety of New Zealand during hitchhiking, and I failed to get to the end, because on the southern islands, New Zealand is so green because it rains a lot, and at some point I was so soaked, so wet and cold and wet, that I caved and bought a bus ticket. But that's not the moment you mentioned. Before that, when I was still hitchhiking on the Northern Island, I went to this 90-mile beach, which is on the northwest coast, I think, of New Zealand. I didn't check before. And I basically hiked on a trail, and I didn't see a single other human being, because the weather was not super pleasant. And New Zealand, this again was before Lord of the Rings, when there were far fewer tourists there. I didn't see a human in 30 plus hours. And this is just nature and me walking on and on for hours, enjoying nature. And then I still remember climbing up a hill and reaching the tip of this, not really mountain, it's been a hill, and then looking. Of course, you can't have a view of 90 miles. That's far too much. But having a mile-long view over the ocean, this beach, having reached this, and all of a sudden, right, you're only looking at the next tree, but then this horizon opens up. And this really, in this moment, you get goosebumps. And this, the moment I thought, this is what freedom really, truly looks like. And this aspect of, and I don't say this is the moment I decided to become an academic, but it's something that I enjoy very much. Freedom I felt in this very moment, which was this excitement. I mean, there's many examples. I mentioned unification. People, humans, we love freedom. And that's how I believe people, an environment in which people are empowered to, again, in a certain guardrails to protect them, but on the other hand, also being united with a strategy, can leave their own little dent, maybe not in the universe, but in the organization. This is something that definitely also kind of coined my thinking.
And the way you describe it, for me, it also sounds like freedom is also the absence of fear of retaliation for trying out something. And I think there is also a golden thread to your understanding of leadership that you are trying to implement right now, right? So that people can really step up and say, yes, let me do this. I think I can do this. If not, I'll come back, but give me the trust and I'll do my very best to, contribute to WHU.
Absolutely. That's a perfect summary. And I think that's still what, not only at WHU, but also to get a little bit at a because you generally to leadership and what we're not good at in Germany and in Europe as a whole, right? We always, and being a very entrepreneurial school, we of course always look also to the US, the Silicon Valley. The US is still the big basically light on the top of the mountain where entrepreneurs aspire to be, where people want to do their IPO and so on and so on. In Europe, we still, in too many instances, have this, again, sounds very black and white kind of culture. Well, this person wanted to be the hotshot entrepreneur. They failed. Well, can they be trusted? They would better not do this again, right? We're not going to finance that again because if someone failed, and this culture of failure that we do have in the US is something that we still need to learn from very much. Because it's not only once you failed and you fear that there's a backlash, but knowing that this might be something that's happening to you is kind of killing the impetus or the impulse to try it out in the first step, right? And that goes beyond the organization, but that's also within a school, and beyond that, what we need in a society. Be willing to take risks, not blindly, of course, but being willing to take risks because you don't need to fear repercussions.
And sorry, Christian.
So yeah, so and again, this does not mean also, because whenever I common point is that, well, everybody who failed then needs to be bailed out. No, absolutely, this is not what it means. There's certain business models that you try out, they don't work. That's what markets do, right? It is not every idea, not every business model can survive, and it's not society's responsibility to basically bail out everybody who failed. That's an important point, because oftentimes when I mention this means, yeah, is this why we still support Kaufhof and so on, why taxpayers bail out Lufthansa and so on, and Commerzbank? No, I would say these are other reasons, because they fulfill important infrastructure systemic roles, but this is not what trying out and failing in a social democracy means. But of course, again, the big challenge here we have is to, I think, in Europe, is to empower people in the sense that they should be willing, even like, to take risks.
Christian, allow me one more critical question. There is you draw the comparison with the US. In the US, the elite universities are known for their fraternities and their drinking rituals and all the rituals that sometimes are also dangerous and definitely counterproductive. There is now a tendency that this also happens at WHU, and yeah, probably it was very uncomfortable to have this press coverage in Spiegel about that. What's your take on that, and what is the school doing about it?
I mean, yes, you directly mentioned this Spiegel article that surfaced a couple of weeks ago. This is absolutely something that's uncomfortable. But this was not something that was, so the Spiegel article itself reported about an incident that happened in the last welcome or introductory week in our Bachelor of Science program here on the Fallendar campus. So we had already known from since last August, September, what happened there and what has later on been discussed then in the article. But we take this very seriously. Full stop. We take this very seriously. Because what happened here is that clearly red lines were crossed because people were forced to drink alcohol against their will. Again, I'm not telling anyone, I personally don't drink a lot of alcohol, but if people want to consume alcohol, so be it, right? They should do that, but willingly, knowingly. And if they decide it's a no for me, it's a no. That's something that someone else needs to respect. And we've already made clear by, again, why has this been covered by Spiegel? Because we kicked out 4 students who basically were in a higher semester and in charge of onboarding these younger students. And they, in a sense, abused their power. Not in a sense, they abused their power, I would say, because they coerced to threaten an individual into drinking. And that's something that we will not tolerate. A culture in which people are threatened, coerced, or made somehow to do things against their will. And that's firstly, I think, very clear in terms of positioning to communicate. That's not the kind of environment we want. We want a supportive environment that is also respectful, which means if people don't, and this is not limited to alcohol, if they don't want to do certain things, they shouldn't be forced. There shouldn't be either an explicit or no implicit threat, right, to that. And well, we have made changes. So it's, of course, not fixed by kicking out 4 students. Obviously not. We have made changes to our introductory week in consultation with students, because part of what happens there is organized by students. And again, we're very, very proud of our very, well, entrepreneurial, I mentioned before, but passionate students who are very active in all sorts of student clubs. So they also partly organize this introductory week. And we need, but they also, again, we're talking about a minority clearly of students here. The majority of students also don't want that kind of environment. But as you can see, right, a small minority of people can definitely destroy, even, I would say, to make really clear that we take this very seriously, a reputation of a school. We don't want that. We make changes to the introductory week. We communicate very clearly what it is that we want. Also, we have a so-called hint box, so a whistleblower system that we installed, a certified one late last year, which means people can, not only students, but in general, also local citizens of Fallendar, people within the organization, of course, likewise, can reach out anonymously. But a whistleblower system means anonymously we can, IP is a certified system, IP address is not, we can't trace it back, but we can get back to the people, to the whistleblower, asking questions, right? Because this might be a very abstract, we need more information. So this system has been installed last December. And we also basically have more student counseling that we already had that in the past, but we're rolling it out more broadly. We have more student liaisons within the individual cohorts that are in touch with our Code of Conduct Commission. We make changes to our Code of Conduct. Likewise, so there's, without going into detail, these are 10 measures in total that we are ready to communicate fairly soon, but that's too soon here to spell out every single detail. We started a working group already with the alums that we have on board, with even the head of the foundation of WHU, who's part of this task force that basically looks at the underlying reasons and looks at measures, because we clearly want to have this environment in which everybody feels safe and can express whatever it is that is within, of course, certain rules, without fear for repercussion. And it can be a no, but it can be a yes to something else that someone else disagrees with, but that's something they will then have to tolerate as well.
It's another dimension of freedom, right? To not interfere with the freedom of others.
Exactly.
So I think that humanistic spirit kind of transpires when you speak. I think that becomes very, very clear. Okay, so we had WHU, what you're working on there. What kind of imprinted your own value system, your own life. You mentioned your academic career. What were occasions that prepared you for the leadership role that you're having today? I mean, obviously you were a chair, and you were how do you say prodekan?
Associate dean.
Associate dean, thank you. Before, but that is a different dimension now. So looking back, what were things that prepared you?
Well, firstly, fair question, right? Because as an academic, you're not, and as a finance guy also, because some in academia, of course, also researching leadership. We also have these people within the organization. I'm a finance guy. I've no kind of, in a narrow sense, leadership research affiliation in any sense or form. But I already felt at the time when I was an assistant professor at the University of Bonn, because the way I was at a chair back then, and the chair, so the professor running the chair, this was a relatively large chair, and the assistant professors were basically more or less in charge of the operations. And I felt that, yes, I'm an academic, and of course I've worked in companies, but I don't feel I have the tools that I need. And I signed up for a leadership development course at the University of Bonn, and I was a bit surprised because at first it was aimed at professors, and I was an assistant professor, but nonetheless I just tried. I signed up, and I got in there. And when I went to this training, which was several occasions, I talked to the trainer, a human resource person, I would say, at the University of Bonn. I'm a bit surprised I don't see professors here, and they say, well, professors don't go there. The chairs don't go there themselves. They might send the assistant professors, like in your case, because they feel that it's kind of below their kind of dignity. They're a leader naturally if they're a chair. But no, I think we need to be very also honest about the things that we know we don't know. And this was kind of my first connection to leadership, I would say, where I, in a structural fashion, approached this with a coach. And later on, again, being in different leadership roles, making experiences, and also talking, frankly, I learned by talking to leaders in organizations, because as faculty also, that's one of the privileges. If you're a professor also at a leading business school, you get in touch with people at the C-suite of large organizations, and they talk to you privately, and also sometimes share experiences where you also then learn about things that worked and didn't work, about organizations that flourish and organizations that might even become dysfunctional in some cases. And that has kind of then shaped my picture of how I want to lead.
Thank you. Christian, when you look at the world right now, and you're very interested in the world and very connected with the world, and you look into the news, how do you stay positive, or how do you get back to being positive after the news are over?
Yeah, firstly, I try to look at the positive aspects even within the news, because I would say in many, not always, of course, but in many cases, there's a silver lining. But I firstly think, again, some people I can perfectly understand if their past has been. I've been a very lucky person simply in my life. I had this privilege of growing up in a Western society free of the fears of war and the other. So I think well, responsibility is maybe too big a word, but I have everything that it takes to be a happy person. And happiness per se does not solve problems, but it makes addressing problems a lot easier. So I try to, and again, I'm not always smiling and I'm not always in a positive mood, but when I'm not, I try, and that's now finally answering your question, look at things that help me get into a good mood. And that's, at the end of the day, I'm also looking out the window, being out in nature again, and also again, and of course, my kids, that's not their responsibility is not to make me happy, but they do make me happy, even if there's sometimes, of course, kids can be super cruel and super stressful, and again, their job is to be kids, and this means sometimes they can be super annoying to you as a parent, but at the end of the day, they make me happy. Very much so, because it's they're good people. I think all kids are good people. If they're not, something must have happened to them. But humans, at the end of the day, are good. Those who are not, I think something might have happened in their past that has led them to who they are today. But being out. Being disconnected from the things that made me unhappy, be it the news, be it something at work, but you clearly need sometimes a cut, a disconnect, also to kind of align your thoughts.
Thank you. That makes sense. Last question. What would be one thing that I haven't asked you yet that our listeners and viewers could be, interested of?
Find out where you're, maybe where did you, because it's important that people find out in a sense where their limits are. I think that's in particular if you're in this very kind of performance, excellence driven environment, sometimes people go too far, and I sometimes find this aspect of a work-life balance a bit difficult, because my wife always reminds me, and yes, I know that I work too much, but she, even before that talk, I said, well, I didn't work last night. And said, well, what was it? You were sitting in front of your computer and reading The Economist. Yeah, no, but that's not work, right? I'm interested in even if I sometimes share an article there. But works sometimes, of course, costs you energy. It sometimes gives you energy. We had a great graduation last Friday in the MBA program. That's also something that's work, but it gives you energy. See happy people. But need to really find out where your limits are and then draw a line. And if we have another 2 minutes, I have another anecdote in this context, because while I was doing my PhD, I worked also during my time as a diploma student at the University of Bonn. Being a geek, I was always interested in computers, networks, and servers, and so on. I built my first Linux server just to play around with it, see what it could do, right? And I did at a tax consultant. I was their IT person. And then at some point, that was already during my diploma studies, I did IT and then I always moved more and more towards tax consulting. And at the end, during my PhD, I also worked at this tax consultant and at the university, which was difficult because at the tax consultant, I then had 1 or 2 booking assistants, but I was responsible for clients. So doing 2 jobs in parallel, I went to the tax consultant at 6 in the morning till 8:30 or 9 o'clock. Then I went to the university, and at 3 o'clock I went back. And this was super to the tax consultant again. This was super stressful, and because also a client won't understand. They call at 11 o'clock when I was at the university, where's Christian? And I need to tell he's not here. Your client paying you wouldn't understand that, right? But everything for this really environment in which you work from 6 a.m. to everything needs to work out. And then one morning at 6 o'clock, I wanted to get, and of course I had my key card to get into the building of the tax consultant, but there was a door before this main entrance. And this was locked because the cleaning person accidentally flip the physical switch. And I got really angry at this moment, standing there at 6 o'clock before this gate, and I was really grumpy. And then I stepped back for a moment and said, well, what are you doing? Are you now really angry at this person who accidentally locked this gate? Because she didn't know that you need to come to work at 6 o'clock. Something is wrong with your life. Change it. And because I'm not a person who's angry and grumpy, but this really made me angry at this moment. So to understand, I went above my limits at this point. That's not a life I wanted to lead, and I needed to make a tough decision whether I wanted to be a tax consultant or an academic. You see how this decision worked out? And this one moment I will always remember, because it really showed me there's a limit to working and optimizing everything.
Thank you for sharing that with us. That was a great closure. Well, Christian, thank you so much for taking us through the tour of your vision, your strategy, your approach to leadership, to culture, your own life, your values. I think that was a very, very holistic and deep view that you allowed us to take. So thank you very much for that. I know that we will stay in touch, and I'm looking forward to that. And why don't we have another talk maybe in 2 years' time and see where we stand there, or where you or the school stands there? What do you think?
So thanks again for the invitation. Sounds like a plan.
All right, Christian, all the best. Thank you so much. And
Thank you,
see you soon.
It's been a pleasure. See you soon.
Bye-bye. That was Christian Andres. What are your thoughts, reflections, something that stuck with you, that made you think? Looking forward to receiving your reflections, your email. Send us an email at leaderstalk@leadership-choices.com. Looking very much forward to hearing from you. And also, please leave us a review or a comment on the podcast platform of your choosing. Also looking very much forward to hearing from you there. So thank you for listening in. Stay healthy, and see you soon here at Leaders Talk. Bye for now.